Now, the best way to approach Illustrator is essentially from the standpoint of shape and color. Illustrator, being a vector artwork program, is very much based in shape. When you're working with Illustrator in the ways that we would, doing flyers and more, we'll say, corporate material, you're not necessarily using Illustrator from the artistic graphic arts direction that many users would. We're using it more from a very clean, grid-based design approach. That's not to say that you can't have fun with it. It's just you don't want to complicate it for yourself. You want to keep it simple. And the kind of work that we're doing, especially with our current project, is something that we can approach Illustrator quite simply. And over the next couple tutorials, we'll see some little tips and tricks that will make things easier, more interesting, but the basics, I would say, are shape and color. So when you're working from Photoshop to Illustrator, you're working on an image. So we have an image here that we assembled, and this has been cropped to size. So you'll see there'll be a tutorial about that as well, about what cropping to size refers to, and definitely watch that. That's discussing how we take an image and correctly size it for our use in Illustrator and or InDesign. And that tutorial will be at the end of today's set as well. But we have this image set, it's ready to go. Now, the first thing, bringing an image into InDesign or into Illustrator is the same as InDesign. So going to File and Place. So I'm just going to place this image in that I have. And you can place any image that you'd like in as well. You'll be doing that, of course, with your flyer. So I would suggest in tutorials like this, maybe working with the elements that you might be working with on your own flyer, and then just kind of running with the design as you wish. So you'll see when I brought this in, it does look a little fuzzy. Illustrator is a little different than InDesign, where InDesign has that, we go to View and we can show the high quality display. Illustrator doesn't have that. Illustrator, we zoom in and you start to see the clarity. And it's just the way Illustrator handles the images. So don't panic if you bring something in and it looks fuzzy. Once you zoom in, you'll start to see the clarity a bit. So I place an image in. Pretty easy. But that image is now an object in the file. So we can, when we have objects, we can select them and find out the information we need about them. And you'll notice that it's giving you the location of the object and the size of the object. And this becomes the object panel up here. Now I'm going to make sure I'm on my correct cursor. So when we talk about the navigation of Illustrator, it's essentially the same. It's the same as InDesign. Zooming in and out is still Space Command or Space Command Option. And when you hold those down, click and drag. So Space Command, click and drag. And I'm dragging in and out with Space Command held down. And that lets me zoom in and out. Or I can hold Option and I can click to zoom out. So the navigation is the same. Holding the space bar to move the page. I never use the scroll bars. I have this one always covered up anyway, but you can see it's just not pleasant to use those. So I zoom in on something, press the space bar, and then I get to exactly what I want to see. Okay, and then of course always trying to remember to revert back to your main selection tool. And that main selection tool allows you to select an object in its entirety, where the direct select, just like in InDesign, lets you select a single anchor point. Now this is an image, So it's not vector art. So even though there's an anchor point, it's kind of a false anchor point in the sense that this is an image and it's not allowing me to select a specific aspect of this object. So I place the image in, and once you have something in any object that you've created in Illustrator or that you've brought in, you can lock that object. So I can click on an object, press Command 2, or go to Object and Lock Selection, and that will keep it from moving. I can't select it. I'm not going to accidentally move it around. If you want to unlock, you'll go back up to the Object menu, and unfortunately it says Unlock All. So if I had many things on here that were locked and I went to Unlock All, they would all unlock, but there's a little trick to that. If I did have many objects that I unlocked, I could hold Shift down, click the one that I wanted to keep unlocked, which is deselecting it, and then I could relock all the others. So don't worry about that. If you get there and you have a problem, just let me know. But there are little workarounds for some of the annoyances that you run into. Okay, so we placed an image in, File, Place, and let's look at some shape work here. So Illustrator, like I said, it works with shape and color. That's a good base to look at it. So if I wanted to work on this flyer, for example, this is my feature front maybe, and I have a logo. I'm just using a generic, this is my business logo. I'm using a generic logo here, so disregard if you're not understanding what the flyer's about, because it's not going to make much sense. But I'm going to do Command Shift and my right square bracket just to bring that to the front. So that's arrange. So again, I like to work with key commands when I use this. But this logo it's just a bunch of anchor points that are creating line art. So you can see when I use my direct select cursor, I can click on portions of this logo and change it. Now I wouldn't be changing a logo, but this logo is based in shape. If I do Command Y, I see the line art. So this logo is assembled by line art and vectors, and essentially it's working with shape. Now that's a logo, and sometimes we just want a section of color. So that's where we work with the shape tool. So again, very similar to InDesign. However, it allows us to do a little bit of different work. Now, there is a lot of overlap between InDesign and Illustrator, even with the shapes and how we can unify them and have them interact with one another. But Illustrator makes it a little smoother and a little more fluid to work that way. So if I wanted to put a band at the bottom of this page, I'm going to go from bleed guide to bleed guide. And if I wanted that color band, now you're going to see I'm very quickly always defaulting back to my main selection tool there. So I can change with the handles, we call these the handles. I can change the shape, I can change the size, so holding Shift while I click and drag will proportionately change the size, or I can just drag that handle without Shift and it changes it. So shape work is initially quite simple, and it's something that you can very easily just play around with. Choose a shape, see what happens. You know, you move the mouse and you click, things happen in Illustrator. That's pretty much how it goes. Then it's up to you to get it how you want. So my direct select cursor, or my selection cursor, or my direct select, and when you go to the direct select, that's when you can start to change things as you want. So knowing the difference, of course, between the two cursors, that will happen quite quickly. If you have the wrong cursor and you try to move something, you'll realize you're moving a portion of it, or you're moving just, you're skewing something and so on. So you get used to those pretty quickly. Now, this is just a band along the bottom. Being a flyer, maybe you're going to have your layout, your sketch, and so on, but you want to be sure that you're arranging these things appropriately. So if I right click on this and choose arrange, which you may remember also from InDesign, I can send it to the back, and then it's going to be hidden. So you're still working in not necessarily layers, because I haven't worked on any different layers, but you're working in order of placement on the page, the way things have been placed. So I'm going to bring this back to the front, and I'm going to show you a couple other things so that you'll see the way shape works here, just to give you an idea of really what shape means in Illustrator. So I'm going to make a square here. And you can try this. This is a fun exercise to understand a little bit about Illustrator. And I'll just make a square. And it's coming up this color because that's the color that I had by default. You may have by default, you probably have a white and a black stroke, a white fill and a black stroke. If you want to change that, you can double click and you can change the color. I'm going to show you more about color in a moment, but you also have your swatches. So you can go to your swatch palette and you can access that through the windows and choose any color you want, but I'll show you how you can access even more colors. Either way, you want to get a color you can see. And then I'm going to do a circle here using my ellipse tool. And when I do the circle, I'm going to hold shift to make a perfect circle. And I'm going to hold, while I'm holding shift and my mouse, I'm holding the space bar. That lets me move it. If I let off the space bar, I can keep drawing. So space bar lets you move it where you want, let off the space bar, and you can keep drawing. Now I want this circle to be the same size as the square. So it's not at the moment, but if I choose the square, I have the size up here. I'm just going to copy that. So Command C, I'll select the circle, and I'm going to paste that in. And when I tab, it goes the same. So now what I've done, very simple. I made a square, I made a circle, any size. I took the size of the square, the dimension, and I clicked on the circle and I pasted the dimensions into it. The idea there was I simply wanted to get the same dimensions of the square and circle. So pretty simple at the moment. Now I'm going to rotate this square. I'm going to select it again using my main selection tool. And I'm going to hover over the corner here and you'll see the rotation symbol. And I'm going to hold shift down and I'm going to shift, click, and drag. So when I hold shift, I actually do it almost unison with the mouse. Shift, click, and drag. And what that's doing is it's letting me incrementally rotate this. And I know it's going to go straight up and down. So if I did that without shift held, I'm on my own. If I wanted to get that at a perfect 45, it'll eventually go there, but it takes a little more time and attention than I want to spend. But when I hold shift, it goes right there and it's set. It's set at a 45-degree angle. Now you can do any of this in a dozen different ways. However, I'm just trying to show you when you're working with shapes, there's some quick ways, there's some easy ways to reference. So I wanted a circle the same size as my square. That's why I grabbed the dimensions. I wanted to rotate it quickly, so I held shift, click and drag, and I get the rotate. So working with shape, play around with that. Now we're going to move this circle. I'm going to get it so that the circle is centered with this square. So you can see I have some guides coming up. Now these are very helpful when you're aligning shapes. So what I'm doing, I'm getting the center of the circle to the center of this square's line, and I'm making sure the sides are lined up. So I'm letting the guides kind of indicate to me that it's there. Now if I do Command Y, I'll see it's quite well lined up. And Command Y is really helpful because it just hides everything and shows you the line art. But I wanted to get that circle lined up correctly, very accurately to that square. So I'll go over that again. So I had my circle and my square. I rotated the square 90 degrees. Now I'm going to move the circle over onto the square, and I'm using that pink guide that it comes up when we're moving shapes and they're interacting, and it's just telling me, yep, you're centered with that, and then I'm getting that center point on the line of the square, and using my space key to move over a bit, Command Y to see my line art and turn it back. So Command Y will show you the line art, Command Y will take you back to your colors. And then I'm going to click on the circle here. I'll even make it a different color so we can still see where it is. And in this case, I've selected it. Again, I'm with my main cursor. I'm going to hold my Option key down. We've seen this in both Photoshop and InDesign. And when I hold Option, I get that double cursor. That means when I click and drag this object, it will copy it. Now I'm going to click, drag, and hold Shift so that it stays on the same axis that I want. It doesn't go up or down. So I'm going to talk you through this very carefully. So Option, click, Shift, drag. So Option, click, Shift, click, drag, they're all being held down. And then you can see again, these guides tell me when I'm kind of snapping to the side of that square. And I'll do Command Y. Command Y. Okay, and then now I'm going to select all of them. I can click and drag across them, or I can select one, hold Shift, select the second circle, and select the square. So that's called shift selecting. When you click one, hold Shift and select the other items. Or in this case, because I have nothing around it, I can select them all. And now I'm going to go to my Pathfinder. Now, if you don't have that open, you can go to Window and Pathfinder, and it'll open this. I'll drag this tab out. And the Pathfinder is how we take two or more shapes and have them interact. This is worth playing around with, but remember you have to have two or more shapes. So in this case I have three. I have a circle, another circle, and a square. With them all selected, in my Pathfinder I'm going to choose the Unite. And what that's going to do is turn them into one entire shape. And there you have the Instagram heart. Okay, so if I do Command Y, it's gotten rid of all the line art, and that's the overlapping line art, and it's created one single shape. So this is a great example of when in Illustrator you're always trying to look at things, if you're illustrating, from a very basic shape point of view. And then that's why I like this little exercise, because it shows us how we just go from two circles that are the same and a square that are lined up quite precisely. They're sized the same, so the circle is sized the same as the square, but they're lined up precisely, and once they're all brought together, then they can create an icon that we all recognize. And that's when we work with logos. We're always looking for the shape. How to build something from basic shapes first is the easiest. But then, of course, we can get quite complicated, and you start using the pen tool to draw things, and it definitely gets more advanced. But this is a very basic example of how shape works in Illustrator. So again, if I was working on the flyer and I wanted even a sidebar, maybe I would just go to my rectangle. Considering I have my bleed, always want to bleed, I'll go to my rectangle there, and then I can bring in an image. Here I have the puppy, bring him forward. So once you've designed, drawn your layout, for example, in Illustrator, or in like a sketch, you come into Illustrator and you want to really try and look at your sketch from the basics of Illustrator. Shape, image, and you'll have a logo, of course, and all the information you have to have. But the layout can come together quite simply, and it really is actually easy to play in Illustrator versus InDesign. InDesign is a little more structured. It's not as free-flowing when it comes to working with the shapes and moving things around and so on. It can be a little more complicated. Okay, so next we're going to look at working with color in InDesign. A couple options with color and gradient and continued shape work and so on.